Welcome to Stef Talks Trash, the weekly video series that explores the intersection of people, profit, and planet. My name is Stefanie Valentic, Editorial Director of Waste 360, and today we're speaking with CEO of Emerald Packaging, Kevin Kelly. Thank you, Kevin, for joining us today. How are you doing?
Doing all right, just trying to survive the times.
I think all of us are.
Yeah, I know. We tend to think of ourselves as individual at these times, but we're really not. We're all going through the same thing. We really are in this together. So, I appreciate that everybody is going through their moment in one way or another.
All right. So let's just hop right in here. Tell me a little bit about your background in the packaging industry.
Well, I've been in this business 26 years. I left a career in journalism to come into a family business. My father started this business in 1963. I never intended to come into it. But after writing about business for a long time, I got interested in actually running one. And so I came in 1996 and have been here since. I became the CEO in 2002. We make packaging exclusively for the produce industry. So we're the largest producer of flexible packaging, meaning bags like salad packaging or celery in a bag, things like that in the country. We've really been dominant in this segment, which is a small segment when you consider that flexible packaging is a 21 billion pound industry. And we're probably only 22 million pounds. We're a small part of the plastics world, but we make single-use packaging. So this is the universe we're in, and we're in California. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm looking out my window, and it's a gorgeous day. But we need some rain, so I hope the gorgeous days end soon.
So today we're talking about plastics. Can you kind of tell me how, from the packaging perspective, how you've seen the business evolve over the years since you joined it?
Oh gosh, yeah, it's become much more technical. For instance, produce packaging, it just used to be a bag with some holes in it to allow the produce to breathe a little bit. But now there's all this chemistry that goes into the packaging in order to extend shelf life. We put, for instance, in a baby carrot bag, if you were to go and buy baby carrots at the store, there are a couple of dozen 100-micron holes put in by a laser in our facility to extend the shelf life, say, from 16 days out to 29 days. It allows the oxygen in and the CO2 out. And finding that balance is what extends shelf life. And so if you were to go buy a salad in a package, same thing. The whole salad industry exists, whether it's in food service or in retail, because of the chemistry of the package, allowing the oxygen in and CO2 out at the right ratio for every mix, from an iceberg lettuce mix to a more sophisticated romaine mix. Each have their own, what we call, oxygen transmission rate in order to extend the shelf life. And so that's really how I've seen the business evolve. It's still single use, but it's gotten much more heavily weighted towards extending shelf life.
When did you kind of hear about, did you get any pushback from starting to use plastics? And where did you hear that? When did you first hear that it was an issue and that people were asking for or looking for solutions that would be biodegradable or otherwise not just single use?
Yeah, probably 15 years ago, we began to hear more about it. We have a trade association out here on the West Coast called the Western Plastics Association. And we started to hear from legislators that they wanted to start tackling this issue. The legislators in the state of California. And so as an industry here on the West Coast, 15, 16 years ago, we produced a plan, much like the German Green Dot program, to begin to develop recycling structure, recycling programs for single-use plastics. we got quashed in Sacramento by the American Chemistry Council, the Plastics Industry Association, big corporations. And so we ran into very early a desire by California legislators to deal with the issue, but a crushing opposition from the national organizations who had more money to lobby in Sacramento than we did. And money drives, even to this day, a lot of decision making in state capitals. And it was a hard lesson for us, and at the same time told us we were going to have to be much more nimble if we were going to find some way to deal with the demand for a change in the way single-use plastics is dealt with versus really what was possible given the national opposition to what we wanted to do here in California.
So what kind of legislation have you seen kind of presented that has either failed or been successful in this fight against, plastics?
A lot of it very early on. For instance, again, our trade association wrote a law in Sacramento, proposed a law, got it through, defining biodegradable plastic as plastic that met ASTM D6400, so a standard. And I'm sure most of your listeners or viewers know something about D6400 because it's central to the debate of biodegradable. At that time, you had people claiming that things were biodegradable that might degrade in 200 days or a year or 2 years. They were putting what I call foo-foo dust in plastic and calling it degradable and biodegradable. And that stuff, it just doesn't work. They were saying it would biodegrade in a landfill. BS, right? This complete charade. And so we thought as an industry very early that the only way to stop the debate from getting polluted by charlatans was to define what biodegradable meant. And so we passed a bill in Sacramento defining biodegradable as compostable. You had to meet the compostable standard, which is biodegrading to 10% of its dry weight in 81 days. And so that very early on we did that 15 years ago as well. One of the famous bills, of course, is the bag ban bill, which, like bottle bills, has evolved over the years. The first was Assembly Bill 2449, which plastics plastic carryout bags had to be of a certain weight and could be used at certain times, and a certain number of times, and the grocers would have to have the bins outside the store for people to take back the bags. This was a classic example of everybody sort of celebrating an environmental achievement that then turns around and doesn't really work out because the industry never put the money into the advertising of the program at the stores. So very few people to this day take their plastic back to the stores. It's also a hassle. So the industry fought a ban by getting a take-back program in place and then failed to carry through on its commitments. And these are, again, national corporations carrying through on their commitments to advertising and advocating for the program. And that's the story of the industry to a large degree over the years. 2449 was a landmark, it was a shift. And over the years, the carryout SAC has had fees have gone up, mill requirements, thickness requirements have gone up. I think over time, you're going to see outright bans of plastic. You have already, I think, in the state of New York for carryout sacks. So that has been, I guess, the industry focus for the last few years. And just now in the last couple of years, really, we've seen this look at single-use plastics in general. Mm-hmm. And that really is, I think, a proper evolution of the carryout sack concern. And so we've spent time beginning to engage in that conversation. And that's really been the story of the last couple of years, really, when it comes to recycling.
So, have you had a chance to look at the EPA's National Recycling Strategy yet? A big part of it is, addressing contamination and increasing opening up the market and improving the infrastructure. Where do you think that's heading in terms of single-use plastics and how it will help the issue?
Well, I'm praying for a national solution. So I'm praying for that program. I'm praying for the UDOL bill because I really think if we start doing a hopscotch of different programs around the country, we'll never get there. We won't get the recycling infrastructure updated. We won't get the creation of aftermarkets, the things that are going to be necessary to create a real recycling solution. We will not get in a state-by-state program. For instance, Senate Bill 54, that was the big recycling bill, supposed recycling bill in Sacramento last term, had no funding mechanism attached to it. So I said we had to increase recycling rates, but there was no funding mechanism put in place to create the recycling infrastructure to do that. And that's what's possible at the national level. At the state level, state legislators are concerned about seeing that they're raising taxes somehow on business or on individuals. That becomes the major concern. That becomes the real deficit in legislation. At the national level, there isn't that, a tax or a fee doesn't create the same kind of pushback as it would on a state level. And I'm really afraid, like, California will pass a law, Nevada won't, Oregon will pass a law, Washington won't. They will all probably pass laws, but you get my point.
Yeah.
So I'm really hoping that the EPA push, but I'm really hoping for national legislation. So maybe one of the few business people hoping that the Democrats win the races in Georgia, because you're most likely to get that kind of national reform with a Democratic Senate and a Democrat House and a Democrat president. That's probably not what industry really wants to hear. You might with more moderate Republicans. I don't know what the politics of that would be at the national level, but clearly with a Democrat Senate and House and president, at least for 2 years, I think we would see a national program put in place around the EPA and UDOL programs. So I'm praying right now and hoping, because it's really the only solution. Otherwise,
it really just takes a concerted effort to be able to, and not just on a national scale, because once we get it at the top, it'll be able to filter down and kind of, filter into the different states and their plans and what they're doing, and kind of filter down from there. And once everybody's on the same page, then it'll be able to progress forward and get to that 50% rate that the EPA is touting in its draft.
Right. Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. What won't work, which the industry at the national level still somewhat pushes, and I'm rolling my eyes, are voluntary programs where the industry agrees, say, to create a product stewardship organization. Those things just are not going to work with this issue. You really need a funding mechanism that's real and consistent and year to year, and isn't based on the profitability of an industry, which rises and falls in any given year, and where commitments can be withdrawn if a company wants to. If Dow decides that, well, we're not making enough money, and withdraws its voluntary commitment for a year, well, there goes the program. And so I think the funding piece is really key, and you can get that at the national level. And so I don't think the ACA, I think, the ACC, I think, is going to propose its own program, and they're talking about extended producer responsibility, but they're not talking about it in terms of legislation. They're more or less talking about it as a voluntary program, which, won't work.
So let's switch gears here a little bit. Before we started talking here on camera, we talked a little bit about the pandemic and how that's been affecting single-use plastics. Tell me a little bit about that, and what do you think is going to happen in the next couple of years?
Well, I am more or less wrong with almost all my predictions, so we'll be on the next couple of years. But what had happened starting in March, we thought demand was going to fall. So we really thought that with a recession coming, demand would fall, and we were really worried about maintaining jobs. Instead of that, what happened is that people started going to stores and they felt safer buying produce in packaging than buying it unpackaged. So demand here, our orders year over year went up 200% in April, May. And of course, we're not a company that can handle that kind of increase in demand. So it's the reverberations of that we're still feeling. Sales went up for the year 10%. We still have a gigantic backlog. We're dancing in and out of jobs, trying to meet demand. So production and scheduling has become really chaotic. But besides that, you really saw a huge increase, I think, across the board in demand for single-use plastics, in part because consumers thought it was safer. And at the early part of the pandemic, I think that kind of concern was probably well placed. I remember going into a Whole Foods in late March, and I was told by my wife to get a small red cabbage. I do the shopping in the family. And so I'm, going through the red cabbage bin, just, touching every single red cabbage to get down to that small red cabbage. And I'm sitting there going, what am I doing? I mean, I'm corrupting all this red cabbage. And so I've tried to be more respectful of unpackaged things. But over time, these studies have come to say that really the virus doesn't live on produce more than a few seconds if someone has it, and may not even last that long. Of course, science on COVID changes over time, but that consumer perception is very hard to change, especially for a company our size. We're not big enough to go out and say, hey, consumers, don't do this. And the way a market system works is that if, say, Kroger sees the pull-through for packaged produce exploding, well, what's Kroger going to do? They're going to go back to their customers, their suppliers, and say, give us more packaged produce. Don't send unpackaged produce in because we're getting more pulls on packaged than unpackaged. And so demand just continues to go up and is probably going to remain at an elevated level for however long COVID is hanging around. And I know we're talking about vaccines, but the story last night in the New York Times that we only bought enough of, the country only bought enough of the Pfizer vaccine to vaccinate 50 million people tells you, I think, that this vaccination program is going to take a long time to roll out. It's probably going to take all of 2021 and may go into 2022. There's only 2 vaccines right now. And the government, this current government, of course, decided to go cheap. And so they didn't buy enough doses for 100 million people. They had the opportunity, but they didn't take it. And so I expect packaging will probably continue to be in strong demand for quite a while. I think at the same time, whereas in March and April, prior to March and April, I was spending 25% of my day on sustainability. In March and April and May, I didn't spend any of my day on sustainability. It was all just on production and trying to meet demand. The conversation has restarted. So while plastics use continues to rise at the same time, even consumers are are demanding us to relook at single-use plastics and recycling and biodegradable packaging and start addressing these issues again. So I think the industry thought, phew, we're not going to have to deal with this. And it wasn't true. It just by summertime, the conversation had switched back.
Yeah. So it's kind of funny. You mentioned before that, the money wasn't really put into the advertising to tell consumers, how they can return plastic packaging if they wanted to, or, alternatives to, single use and what can happen with it. Do you think that, maybe now that conversation started from the consumer level, that it'll kind of go back up and the industry will spend the money on alternatives?
Well, I think the industry is going to be forced to spend money on recycling, on reforming this. I think that'll come from national legislation. As we said, it could come from state, but I think national legislation will push the conversation on recycling. I am not a fan of biodegradable packaging. I'm actually not a fan of the take-back program either. So biodegradable packaging, and by that I mean compostable, requires a certain temperature in a compost to biodegrade. And there are very few of those composts in the United States that will accept biodegradable packaging. On top of that, the 81-day number now is really not relevant. Composts are turning in 40 days, and packaging won't degrade in those 41 days or 40 days. So there really isn't any place to put biodegradable packaging but in the garbage bin. It won't, the last thing you want to do is put it in your home compost, because it'll never compost. You don't get high enough temperatures in a home compost in order to get packaging to compost in the time in which you would want. So I really don't see biodegradable as a plausible program. Plus, think about it. We use 21 billion pounds of plastic in this country, just packaging. And maybe there's 100 million pounds of capacity for compostable packaging. It's just not scalable in the time frame that we need to scale. Now, the store take-back program, sounds good, and maybe it gets people thinking about recycling their packaging. But imagine if all of us took our packaging back to your local Safeway or Albertsons. They become a solid waste dump. It's just, it's a preposterous program, really, at the end of the day.
It's just passing things back and forth and not really, alleviating the issue.
Right. Well, and it's not capable, again, of being scaled. The only thing that you could really scale is a curbside program, or a program where you have to take it back to a large central location in a city. But neither one of those are solutions. Plus, the dirty secret of the store take-back program is that, again, it's a voluntary program that companies have to belong to. You're supposed to qualify the package, the plastic, so that to say that it could actually be taken back. But there's really no qualification. Stores and retailers are getting that take-back label for their packaging with almost no testing. It's a chaotic program, and so industry just doesn't want to deal with that. And that's why you need national legislation, because otherwise the market. Listen, I have a customer who's leaving, say, non-recyclable packaging for a recyclable package that can't be recycled anyway right now, right? And in order for him to do that, he has to increase the plastic used in the packaging by 20%. So he's increased the amount of packaging he's using, and it's not going to get recycled. But they get to use that little bug, and they get to feel good about themselves. These kind of solutions are, I know that the public wants to think, for instance, that biodegradable is a solution, but they don't think about scaling it, and frankly, they don't want to pay what it would cost to produce a biodegradable package, which costs 400 to 500% more than your normal package. So we really have to be realistic, I think, in this conversation about recycling. And we then have to be realistic about, okay, 10, 15 years out, we've spent all this money. Have we reached 50%? Have we reached 75%? I mean, there have to be metrics, they have to be met, and there has to be a time frame. There has to be money generated so that we do get a national push on recycling. And if it doesn't work, then the industry is going to face the existential question of whether it needs to exist or not, or where it needs to exist. Do you need packaging for green onions? Really? You know, do you need packaging for celery? You know, you need packaging for salad. What is packaging, food packaging, more useful than not? I mean, do you need pouches for your kids? You know, fruit drinks. You know, there are certain areas I think where packaging helps actually reduce waste, and that's probably more over on the food side because it extends shelf life. And there's, believe it or not, electronic solutions coming where a package will communicate that to your iPhone or to an intelligent refrigerator that you're coming up on the use by date. And so it'll actually help, the package will actually help reduce food waste, which of course is a huge contributor to greenhouse gas, probably more than packaging, although you'd really have to look at the long chain of natural gas production that is used to make plastics to really make that determination, because there's a lot of leaks in natural gas lines. And this is really the whole problem with the conversation, is that you really have to look at the complexity of the questions. It's not a simple answer. Banning a grocery takeout sack probably makes big sense, right? Because you can use your own reusable bag, or you can use a paper bag that you pay for at the store that's recyclable. So there, a ban probably makes total sense. Over in other parts of food packaging, more open to question. The overall carbon footprint of plastics, well, you got to look at the whole natural gas supply chain. And those kind of things, you know, don't happen because they require really complex study. And you know, nobody's really, I mean, there are some universities that are starting to do that, and we need that information. There is starting to be more pressure about natural gas line leaks, because methane, of course, is a huge contributor to greenhouse gas. But I think we have to look at the whole carbon footprint of everything and really make intelligent decisions about where single-use plastics is useful, where it's not. If it hurts the industry, so be it, because all of us want the planet to be here for our grandkids. You know, I have this conversation all the time with my kids. Oh, yeah, was this packaging really necessary, Dad? And you scratch your head and say, well, maybe, maybe not. Yes and no. You have to really look at the big issues and be intelligent about what's to be banned and what's to be kept and what's to be recycled. And I think that's the complex conversation you can probably have at a national level that you're not going to get at a local or state level.
So do you think it would be beneficial for, on the national level, to set, you know, have the overarching goal of 50%, but set smaller incremental goals along the way so that they're addressing those types of things, like you were saying, the research that's coming out, the way the consumers are using plastics, and if they're actually needed within that particular, you know, item?
Yeah, I absolutely think that's the way to go. I think you need metrics. In business, we use metrics. Yeah, what we're talking about here is a recycling business, right? And so you need metrics. How successful are you? Not just recycling, but then finding the end markets for its reuse. Because you want, I mean, we talk about the circular economy, and that's something industry says they're addressing. Everybody's got goals to get to be more circular by 2025, which in fact most folks are falling behind on already because of the complexity again of the issue. But yes, for recycling rates, you need metrics, and if we're failing, then why we're failing needs to get addressed. And you know, we're going to go way off topic here, but I was listening to Michael Eric Dyson, he's a commentator and a university professor who looks at race. And earlier this year, the country seemed to be on the verge of having a real conversation about race. 3-4 months later, it's evaporated because it's a real complex issue. In the state of California, we had a proposition on the ballot where about yes or no for affirmative action in universities, reinstate affirmative action. It lost by a landslide. And so, you know, you really have to think, what are white people willing to give up for racial justice? What opportunity might they be willing to give up? How much of their wealth are they willing to give up? And this is the same thing in recycling. What are we willing to actually do? What behavior are we willing to actually change? And it gets, you know, everybody has the good intention, but it's hard work. Change is hard work, whether it's personal life or race or recycling or addressing greenhouse gas issues. It just can't be BS goals. There have to be real goals. There has to be real sacrifice. There has to be real commitments and change. And you get that in a national program. You get racial justice when you raise inheritance taxes and you raise wealth taxes and you create money, you know, to fund programs that actually change people's living situations. And those kinds of things aren't going to happen at the state or local level. And I'm not even sure that most people at the end of the day really, really want to make the sacrifices. I'm not sure most people at the end of the day, most companies at the end of the day, really, really want to look hard at their products and say whether they're necessary. And that's really what's going to be needed. And so as weeks go by and as years go by, I become less and less confident that we're actually going to deal with these questions. I mean, I'm really hopeful at the national level we'll finally get going, and that may drive more conversation and commitment and real change. You know, it's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy, and people have to accept that. If they want to save the planet, it's not going to be easy. If they want to create recycling systems, well, they're going to have to pay for it, and they're going to have to create end markets for this stuff. Not just plastics, but paper and cardboard and everything. I mean, so much right now that's supposedly recycled is going into landfill, and most people don't know that. And companies are putting those, you know, number 4s and number 5s meaningless because they have a paper label, say for instance, on a clamshell that could otherwise be recycled. And you know, we've known about that for years and it hasn't changed. So I think we're right to be pessimistic, but I think at the same time that doesn't mean we stand still. I think we really do have to push the recycling. We really do have to push recycling efforts because that's the only solution. Biodegradable is not a solution. Store take back not a solution. We really across the board have to look at recycling. It's the only way to go, and it has to come in a national program.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know, as we're winding down here, I just have one final question. And what's next for Emerald Packaging?
Well, I always ask myself that, and I haven't the foggiest. I think we'll be involved in this debate and conversation a lot over the next year. We provide 250 jobs, and I think we're going to be providing more jobs just given the demand for packaging. But at the same time, you know, I think even someone like myself has to look at the issue and say, okay, is this viable? should I be in another business? Should we be investing in recycling as a family as opposed to this business? Because really that's the future. So I think as a family, because this is a family business and we have other family businesses, we're really going to have to look at where our investment money should go. And I don't think it's going to go into this business long term. I think it'll go into something like recycling long term, because I think I think there's money to be made in recycling, probably more money to be made in recycling than in single-use plastics. Mm-hmm. So I think Emerald Packaging will evolve in interesting ways in the next 5 years, and I think that's what's exciting is that evolution. So I'm hoping the conversation nationally goes in the right direction. I'm excited to be involved in that. And I'm excited by what opportunities will open up if we get a national program.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you, everybody, for viewing my first episode of Stef Talks Trash. For this and other episodes, visit waste360.com.